already have the sun blazing in on me, but we're going to go for this anyway. So to start off the Joylet Club, I've already explained, some of the idea of how you're going to be doing it, focusing in on one family. But I wanted to show you, talk a little bit, give you a tiny bit of an intro by looking at the opening part here. So, do you make sure you read these opening parts of the section? So, this is Feathers from a Thousand Li Away, and it has a small anecdote, and then it gets into the first chapter. But these are really helpful little stories that begin the each section and kind of give you a feel for each section. And in this case, the first one kind of gives you a feel for the book. So I'm going to go through this part with you, so you can start picking up on some of the ideas that you'll see throughout the whole book. So let's just read it together and we'll kind of talk about it as we go through. The old woman remembered a swan she had bought many years ago in Shanghai for a foolish sum. This bird, boasted the market vendor, was once a duck that stretched its neck in hopes of becoming a goose. And now look, it is too beautiful to eat. Then the woman and the swan sailed across an ocean many thousands of li wide, stretching their necks toward America. On her journey, she cooed to the swan, "In America, I will have a daughter just like me, but over there, nobody will say her worth is measured by the loudness of her husband's belch. Over there, nobody will look down on her, because I will make her speak only perfect American English. And over there, she will always be too full to swallow any sorrow. She will know my meaning, because I will give her this swan, a creature that became more than what was hoped for." But when she arrived in the new country, the immigration officials pulled her swan away from her, leaving the woman fluttering her arms and with only one swan feather for a memory. And then she had to fill out so many forms, she forgot why she had come and what she had left behind. Now the woman was old, and she had a daughter who grew up speaking only English and swallowing more Coca-Cola than sorrow. For a long time now, the woman had wanted to give her daughter the single swan feather and tell her, "This feather may look worthless, but it comes from afar and carries with it all my good intentions." And she waited year after year for the day she could tell her daughter this in perfect American English. So I believe, as I've said before, especially with Their Eyes Are Watching God, opening paragraphs, opening chapters, they're really important because they're setting the tone. So what is this telling us about the rest of the novel? So let's begin. I'll kind of going to go through, and if I were to do a deep dive annotation in this, I'll show you kind of what I would do. So the old woman remembered a swan. Well, that immediately makes me think of, I guess I'll use comments. Swan makes me think of the ugly duckling. One thing we do have to remember is that when we have these connections, that's the connection I'm making. But this book is about Chinese immigrants and then Chinese American people. And so sometimes the references that are going to be used are going to be different than ours. We have this whole kind of canon of Western culture, Western references that will still be referenced in this because we have a mix of Eastern and Western cultures in this book. But anyway, some of these things are a little bit universal, surprisingly. So it makes me think of the ugly duckling, and we'll see how that plays out throughout this. She bought the swan for a foolish sum because it was once a duck that stretched its neck and in hopes of becoming a goose. So that's really, I think, the part that makes me think of the ugly duckling Artha here, right? Because it eventually became a swan. It was a ugly duckling, but eventually it became a swan. But this idea of stretching her neck too is something different. I'm gonna add an additional comment here. Stretching its neck. So stretching your neck, it's like it's reaching for something. And also when I think about like stretching your neck, you're like putting your neck out on the line, right? That's being vulnerable. You're taking a risk in a sense. So this woman buys the swan, and I would assume she bought it for a foolish sum. So I'm thinking all these things are the reason she's buying it. Like that it was once this duck that stretched its neck to become a goose, and now it's a swan. And it's something that reached for something more, that took that risk. So we see the woman doing the same thing. She sailed across an ocean many thousands of li wide, stretching their necks toward America. So here we have an obvious reference saying that the woman and the swan are similar in some way. They're both stretching their necks. America is the thing she's reaching for. On her journey, she cooed to the swan. In America, I will have a daughter just like me, but over there, nobody will say her birth is measured by the loudness of her husband's belch. Nobody will look down on her because I'll make her speak only perfect American English. She'll always be too full to swallow any sorrow. So, what's interesting to me is that she's cooing to the swan. And I'm like, is it a baby? Is the swan really her daughter? Not like literally, but is this supposed to kind of stand in that she has this dream? The swan represents her dream, and now she has this daughter, and maybe the daughter is her dream. And what's interesting is what she wants for her daughter is her daughter to be just like her. Maybe I'll turn off the comments. I don't want to comment. I just actually want to highlight. Let's do pink. Highlight pink. She wants her daughter to be just like her. But what's interesting is what she also says she wants for her daughter. That her worth isn't measured by the loudness of her husband's belch. Nobody will look down on her. I'm going to say worth isn't measured. Nobody will look down on her. Speak perfect American English. Too full to swallow any sorrow. Oops. So that's what she wants for her daughter, to be just like her. Uh, and then all these things, which is interesting because that doesn't sound like her. Like it sounds like these are all things that she's experienced. Um, Having lots of sorrow, not speaking perfect American English, people looking down on her, her worth being measured by her husband. It sounds like all those things are things she experienced, but yet she wants her daughter to be just like her. There might be like a conflict here, but those are the things she wants. And then she will give her daughter this swan to show like this idea of more than what was hoped for. So she has these hopes for her daughter, and she wants her daughter to fulfill those hopes. But she arrives, and they pull the swan away from her. So is the swan at this point hope? If we wanted to make a kind of direct symbol, and did the immigration officials pull that hope away from her, leaving the woman fluttering her arms? Now the woman sounds like, I don't know, let's do blue. I mean, a bird flutters. Is the woman the bird? Again, I feel like I'm doing a lot here. I've done this book so many times, but um, you can see that it's very obvious that this goose, whatever it is, it represents hope in some way. I know I was kind of confusing by saying, is it her daughter? But her daughter is maybe also hope. Like all of this is hope. Her hopes are for America. Her hopes are for a life like this. Her hopes are for her daughter to have a life like this, for her to have a life like this. So the idea of her and her hopes and her daughter all are kind of connected to the swan. So she's only left with the swan feather. And then she forgot why she had come because she had to fill out so many forms and what she had left behind. So the experience of going to America maybe was not exactly what was hoped for. Now she was old and she had a daughter who grew up. And here's the interesting thing, I think, speaking only English, which seems like good, right? That's what she said. Speak only perfect American English. Swallowing more Coca-Cola than sorrow. So again, she wanted her to be too full to swallow any sorrow, and she is more Coca-Cola than sorrow. What does that mean? Here, I think Coca-Cola is standing in for a lot of things. I think for maybe capitalism, not in general, but just like this idea of like consumerism, for um, like artificial. I mean, I don't know. What do you guys think? The tone of that doesn't sound good. Swallowing more Coca-Cola than sorrow. She wanted her daughter to be too full to swallow any sorrow, but now her daughter's swallowing more Coca-Cola than sorrow. It sounds vapid, empty. Maybe that's the tone I'm picking up from it. Even though it seems like it's what she wanted, and those hopes are fulfilled, but now she is too full to swallow any sorrow, but full of Coca-Cola, which is maybe not what she wanted. The woman wanted to give her daughter this swan feather and tell her that it comes from afar, carries her good intentions, but she waited year after year for the day she could tell her daughter in perfect American English. So it seems like she doesn't tell her daughter this. She has the story of these hopes that she came to America for, that she wanted all these things for her daughter, but now she can't tell her daughter because she herself does not speak perfect American English, even though her daughter does. This is what she wanted for her daughter, but what she wanted turns out maybe to not be exactly what she thought. And this experience was not exactly what she thought. So, if we're looking at this as a whole, I know I went through that quickly, but we're seeing a story of an immigrant mother um, come to America with certain expectations and kind of get it, but also kind of become distant from what she originally thought and her original feelings about why she came. And then being unable to communicate with her daughter, who is not just like her, is all these other things she wanted for her, but not necessarily just like her. So that's what we're going to see in this novel, basically. We're going to see stories of four mothers and four daughters. The four mothers are Chinese immigrants coming to America, and then we have their grown-up daughters, flash forward, and them trying to bridge that generational and cultural divide and be able to connect. So this story really sets up the distance between these mothers and daughters. And oh, there's a lot of interesting things about this book, and I can't wait for y'all to read it. But keep this main central story in mind, and see if it refers to any of these women in particular, or if it's just a general story that kind of shows while all these women are different, there is something similar in their stories.